When we're feeling resentment towards a particular person, what's really happening is that we are upset that they have allowed themselves to provide themselves with something that we deny ourselves.
It's time to pivot in your confidence, career, and compensation with the 5-Minute Career Hack Podcast every Monday and Thursday. Now, get ready for a special interview curated just for you. Welcome back to the 5-Minute Career Hack Podcast. We have a special guest for you today who is changing the game and on a mission to end the burnout culture. But before we start, do me a huge favor and press that follow button if you're listening to this podcast and hit the subscribe button if you're watching here on YouTube. This allows you to pay it forward so that these incredible career and life hacks reach more people. Now let's pivot. No fluff, all action. My guest today, Cait Donovan, is a burnout diagnostician for organizations and individuals, keynote speaker, coach, podcast host, and author. If you're experiencing burnout or want to learn more so that you can prevent burnout in the future, you are in the right place right now. Welcome to the podcast, Cait. How are you doing today?
Jamila, I am so excited to have this conversation. I've been listening to previous episodes and I feel like there's some really good things that I can add without repeating stuff you've already done. So I'm psyched to be here and so honored to be invited.
Thank you for coming on. I absolutely love your energy, and shout out to Danielle Cobo for introducing us. And we've been wanting to record this episode for a while now because this topic, burnout, in my opinion, is just starting to go mainstream. But you've been doing this a long time. So tell us, what inspired you to get into this lane, into ending burnout culture? What was the catalyst?
The same as it was for almost everybody that does this work. I burnt out terribly, and when I did it, I was my own boss. I was working in a job that I was passionate about, and I was very confused by what I was reading in the research.
Wow. You're right. Everyone I talk to that does this work, even if it's just a portion of it, the source is always you, right? So number one, audience, if you're listening, you are not alone. Chances are your coach or whoever you're talking to about this, or whomever, the doctor, even if it's that serious that you're having to seek some additional help on this, you're not alone. They probably experienced it too. So thanks for sharing that. And I know we're going to dive a little bit more into that, but tell the audience, how long have you been doing this work?
So I started my burnout recovery in 2016. And I did my first podcast that is now hidden from the interwebs. You cannot find it. Don't even look. In 2017, I started writing my book in 2018, moved back to the States in 2019, and really kicked it off at that point. So I dropped the current podcast, which has been really successful, in June of 2019. My book came out in September 2020. So all of these things happened just before and during the pandemic, which was lucky timing, sort of.
Absolutely perfect timing because and maybe you can help me with the history a little bit, because I actually experienced burnout. It was in 2017, 2018. Mm-hmm. Obviously didn't have that word then.
Right.
What were we calling it back then?
Nothing. Okay. We weren't calling it much. We were calling it burnout. So burnout historically came out in 1978. So they've been studying this since a couple years, since before I was born. But in the mainstream, I think it happened just before and during the pandemic.
Yeah,
is when it really started coming out. And I see a lot of books came out in 2019, 2020, even more since that time. But when I started doing this, when I realized I was burnt out, I'm a super nerd, and my husband was doing a postgraduate degree at Cambridge University at the time. So I had access to university libraries, which, if you know, is like such an amazing tool to have access to. So I downloaded every single thing that was available on burnout at the time. It took me a full year to read through all of the research. And as I read through it, what I kept finding was, I'm not in here. This is about doctors, nurses, and corporate workers. I am none of those things. So what the heck is going on? And how can I, I had support already. I had a coach and a therapist, and then I worked on nutrition with someone afterwards. So I did not do this. I'm not one of those people that's like, I did it all by myself and I'm going to teach you to do it faster. No, I did not do it by myself because I don't think you should.
That part. That's huge.
I don't think you should. Like I was a stress expert when I burnt out. So if I got that to that point as an expert,
Hmm.
I knew that I had taken myself as far as I could without outside support.
Right. Right. And I think that's such a huge point that I also agree that this is not something you should probably, just based upon my personal experience and the individuals that I've coached, primarily because I don't really think you know that it's happening to you, right? You
And
know,
once you
you
find
might know,
out,
then you're like, what do I do?
and it's bad. By the time you find out, you are well deep into it.
Right. So you become aware, and all of a sudden you're kind of almost over the cliff. I'm going to use
Exactly.
that as an analogy that everyone can kind of relate to. So what are some of those symptoms that you see, some of the top symptoms you see across the board, if you had to generalize, because I know every case is totally different, but what are some of those top symptoms that you see with burnout?
So it's funny because there was just a question in my Facebook group about this, and I took it and I took everyone's answers from about 50 something answers and I threw it into Chat GPT, and it spit out, a summary of those things. So I'm going to tell you some of the things that I know from my work and some things that I saw Chat GPT summarize for me earlier today. So there's symptoms that come up in different areas. One of the first areas is emotional. The first tool I give people is something that I call the resentment journal. It's a mini course because one of the emotional things that you experience the most when you're in burnout is resentment. So, resentment, frustration, apathy. If you have a natural tendency towards depression or anxiety, either of those things will be boosted. So, if you have a natural tendency toward depression, you'll probably feel depressed during burnout. If you have a natural
Mm,
tendency toward anxiety, you'll likely be anxious during burnout. So, that will be sort of like overexposed for you during that time. So, and emotionally, you'll be like on a short fuse. So, when normally you feel like you have enough mental bandwidth to sort of self regulate some emotional experiences so you can control your responses to things during burnout, that's not there. You have no access to that.
right. It's exacerbated.
It's exacerbated, and everything that happens feels like one of the most common complaints is when people work with me one on one, they come in and they say, I hate the way I'm treating my family, but I
Mm,
can't help myself. Like I don't feel like I can stop it. It happens and then I feel really guilty, but I can't seem to catch it ahead of time and prevent myself from doing that. And I don't want to be this person in my household.
right. So there's a sense that once you become aware, there's a sense that what you're doing, because you've seen this before, because it's a pre-existing part of your makeup. So
Yeah.
once you're aware, you sense that you're doing this, but you can't control yourself.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So those are some emotional and behavioral symptoms. Physically, I've seen everything from hives, migraines, digestive upset, muscle tension, muscle fatigue. We could go on forever and ever.
Right. So there's an emotional component, as you just described, and sometimes we take it out on the ones we loved, and then here's this physical thing, right?
And
Now,
yeah,
in your research, are you seeing a correlation just the same as some of those emotional things that you described? If if your triggers manifest in the natural as like a physiological reaction, a headache, or fatigue, or whatever that is, that's also exacerbated.
Jamila, you are the first person in 6 years of me podcast guesting consistently to ask me that question.
Wow.
And I'm
Wow.
so glad you did because you're 100% on track. So, my background before I did the work that I'm doing now is I was an acupuncturist for 15 years.
Mm,
So, all I did was work with people's physical and emotional bodies. That was my job, right? And so, I started to notice exactly what you're saying, that chronic stress and burnout will exacerbate any of the places where your body is already naturally weak. So, if you grew up a basketball player and you hurt your knee in high school, when you're burnt out, you're going to have knee pain. You got into a
mm,
car accident when you were 12 and had whiplash, you're going to have neck pain and migraines. You went to Mexico as an 8-year old and had terrible Montezuma's revenge, you're probably going to have some gastrointestinal upset as part of your burnout story. Where your body has weaknesses, burnout will take advantage of.
Wow, that and I the reason what made me ask the question is because you talked about how those emotional things that can kind of creep up. But then I also thought about the fact that when we first started this conversation, we talked about how sometimes you're just not aware, and that's part to me that's part of you not being aware that you're actually experiencing this because again, I'm a basketball player. I've had two major reconstructive knee surgeries, ACLs, so I'm used to chronic here and there. It rains, it's cold, I may have an ache, so I
Yeah,
might dismiss that as something that I
exactly.
would normally experience, or I have some chronic shoulder pain. I might dismiss that. So then it's harder for me to recognize that this may not be the norm and it may be being pressed upon by burnout. So
Exactly.
it's almost in disguise based upon what you already have potential challenges with or chronic issues around
Exactly.
physiologically. So that,
Exactly.
man, that is huge. That's huge. You just paused me. I got goosebumps because that's part of why you can't do this alone because you will dismiss stuff that's chronic.
You just
Period.
will.
You'll
Well,
dismiss it.
and there's I'll talk about one more section before we jump into the next spot. But the other another section that we see a lot of symptoms is on the spiritual slash religious slash whatever you want to call it in your world
Mm-hmm.
area. So I most commonly people explain this as feeling out of touch with their purpose,
Mm,
not understanding that their life has any impact, feeling like their life is meaningless. If they go to church, they start feeling like God is not listening, not paying attention over here. There's so we lose faith in ourselves and in our systems. We lose belief in ourselves and in our systems. So there's this breakdown of I belong here
yeah.
happening.
And I tend to describe it as like I'm going through a valley or a disconnect,
Yeah,
right? Because I'm a believer and I believe in God. And ultimately, I just don't feel as close or as connected for whatever reason in this particular season, right? But
exactly.
even that, for those believers out there, is also something that you just go through in life. So
Of
you
course.
might dismiss that too as I'm just having one of those seasons, right? And I need to, reconnect, but I might not understand that this is being caused by something else,
Yes,
right?
and I think that what we need to help people differentiate is this just a stressful moment or is it burnout? And here's how I like to make this separation. The clearest way to do this, the way to draw the line in the sand the fastest, is to look at your previous 3 to 6 months and say, have I shown an ability to recover from this? So when I take a weekend and I don't do any work over the weekend, am I fairly recovered by Monday and then tired again by Friday?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or did I take like a 7 day vacation and still felt just as bad, if not worse, than before? When it is still in just stress phase, you can recover. You can a couple days, maybe a long weekend, but then you can get back to yourself fairly easily. When it's burnout, you could take a month off and sleep on the couch the whole time and then still feel
Right.
like garbage.
Mm. So
So
your
the question
normal
is,
recovery, right?
yeah, can you recover? So if you are an athlete, you'll know that, like, say you are somebody who runs a 5K most days of the week and takes you a half hour, you go out, you bust it out, it makes you feel better, you clear your head, whatever. When you're burnt out, you do that same 5K, you come back exhausted, you have to take a nap and you feel terrible.
Got it. So you have a baseline. Remember your baselines.
Know what your baseline is and compare yourself to that. Are you able to get back to neutral or are you stuck? And if you're
Mm,
stuck, it's probably burnout.
that part. So making sure, and you said you have a resentment journal, right?
Yeah.
Now, is there space in the resentment journal to record some of these things? If
Yes.
you could
So
talk
the
to us about
resentment
that a little
journal
bit.
is designed to give you an objective place to work through what we call the anger group: resentment, irritation, frustration, annoyance, anger, all the things that pop up during burnout. And look at them objectively and ask yourself what they're trying to do for you. Because most of the time, what you'll find is that resentment is pointing you towards some sort of boundary violation. Most of the time, it's you breaking that boundary, but don't tell anybody I said that.
Right. That's just for those people up close listening.
Yeah, exactly. So, most of the time, you'll find that you're breaking down your own boundaries on a regular basis, which is leading to a cycle of self neglect. And if you start to look at it from an objective place, there's a something called the question sieve that we go through. Once you have a resentment, you ask these questions of it so you can decide what to do with it. What kind of boundary do I need to put here? What kind of change can I put into place? Is this about me or is this about other people?
Mm,
What needs to happen here in order for this to shift? The reason that I think this is so important is because when you are burnt out, you don't have a lot of access to things like gratitude. So
yeah.
somebody can tell you to write a gratitude journal, but 3 things before bed every night, and you will dutifully take out your notebook and be like, "My family, my house, my meals,"
Right.
and then you'll roll your eyes. You won't actually feel any of the gratitude. So you're not
Right.
having that emotional flood, that endorphin flood in your body that tells you that you're having an emotional experience. You're not feeling anything. So it's not actually doing anything for you. Then you feel guilty because you're writing down the things that you don't actually feel. And then you're feeling self-judgmental, or maybe I should speak in I sentences, like, I'm a white woman. I come from a place of privilege. I have this beautiful life. I shouldn't have, like, what am I complaining
Should feel
about?
like this. Right.
So we get caught in these cycles of what I should be feeling instead of what I am feeling. And the resentment journal just says, well, what are you really feeling and what can we do with it? How
Mm,
can we use it to guide you? How can we stop trying to toxic positivity your way out of burnout, because that does not work? And how can we focus on what the lowest hanging fruit, the things that are most available to you, which are frustration and irritation and annoyance and resentment and anger?
right. So face it head on, and
Yeah,
let's not
use
just
it.
try to put something on top, like a band-aid on top of it. Because
Exactly.
if you're in this space, right, if you've gotten past it's just stress and you're in this space, to your point, you will not feel emotionally tied to any positive thing that you're saying. You're in a space of confirmation bias of, I want to see what I feel, and I'm going to attach myself to whatever that negative or not so good feeling is that I see in the natural. So if I see something that can
Yep.
confirm, like, I feel this way, or I'm seeking those things out in that moment, not the
Yes.
positive affirmations or the gratitude.
Exactly. And so if we use that and we can help people start to create boundaries and start to engage in the self-care that actually matters for them and start to reconnect people with their wants, we call these in my business wants, needs, desires, and preferences. We always use those 4 words together: wants, needs, desires, and preferences. Once we start to do that, people can start to recover, because I've never met a burnt out person who knows what they want,
That part.
right? Besides, I don't want to feel like this anymore. But you have not acknowledged your needs. You don't know
Mm,
what your preferences are. You have pretzeled yourself and molded yourself into so many other people's desires, or the desires you assume they have,
right.
that you've lost total sight of who you are as a human and what your needs and wants and desires and preferences are. So this helps you tap into, not only set boundaries, not only self-care, but also tap back into, but what is it that I want out of life?
Mm.
What is it that I'm usually, resentment has this, like, has this flavor of, I'm resentful of that person because they're giving themselves something that I don't allow myself to have.
Now that's heavy. That's heavy. Say that again, and slow it down. Slow it
So
down, because
often
that's serious.
when we're feeling resentment towards a particular person, what's really happening is that we are upset that they have allowed themselves to provide themselves with something that we deny ourselves.
So whether we think we're not worthy of it, not deserving of it, or just hadn't even thought of it, maybe.
Haven't even considered that it was a possibility because I've got to do the dishes before I can sit down on the couch. No, you don't.
Right. Let's break that down simple, because what I hear in that conversation is your spouse, right? Or your life partner, whomever that might be, making
Right?
these choices and
Yeah.
boundaries or whatever you want to call them in that moment. And you're looking at them like you don't, like, what?
If you don't stand and do the dishes soon, I'm about to pop somebody, is what you're
Right.
thinking.
That energy, right? That energy.
Yeah,
Because that's what I heard in that part of that dialogue.
of
Oh, you're
course.
just
And
going
so
to
this
sit down?
Oh, you're gonna sit? Oh, really?
That
And
part.
so you think that you're mad at them for not doing the dishes,
Mm,
but you're not. You're mad that you feel like you have to do the dishes and you won't allow yourself to rest until they're done, and they
right.
will.
And they will. Is
And
that
this is the same for partnerships, for colleagues, for and a lot of times we put ourselves in this situation. So say you there's a new girl at work and she comes in and she doesn't know where to find the numbers she needs for a thing. So you pull up the Excel sheet and you give her the numbers she needs to help her out. She's the new
right?
kid, she's trying to figure it out. So the next week she comes to you for the numbers again and you just give them to her. She's the new girl, she start figuring it out. 6 months later you're like, "New girl."
Let's talk. Because what? I'm
Right? But
tired.
now you've created a system instead of saying, "Hey, new girl, here's the resource you need. Here's how you use it. Here's where you find the numbers by yourself so that you can do it in the future." You do it for them, and 6 months down the road, you're mad for being used. But you taught them
Right.
to come to you and get the answers. So why wouldn't they? What people don't understand is that most people are not trying to take advantage of you on purpose.
Right. You've taught them how to treat you, though.
You've taught them how to treat you, and most people's brains will cut out things that are not necessary because that's what brains are designed to do, right? We're supposed to be efficient in our brains. So when I was burnt out, I was walking around my house thinking I do everything around here. My husband does not do anything around. It wasn't
Yeah.
true. But my brain had cut out all of the things that he was responsible for because they were never on my list. I never saw that they were happening,
That part.
right?
But he was
So I had
in fact doing things.
he was I don't think I gave my filled my dog's water bowl for, like, 3 years.
Right.
But I didn't notice that because it was always done, and when something is always done, your brain stops noticing it on purpose because it is inefficient for multiple people to notice it. Now, women fight about this all the time now, the fair
Hmm.
play games and doing too much stuff at home, and I get it, but we've been in relationships where we are taking stuff off people's plates and then mad that they don't see the stuff that's not on the plate. They can't their brains cut it out because that's what brains do.
We're mad.
We are mad.
We're big mad, as Fly says. We're big mad.
Big mad.
And I
Which is
think it's so
okay,
interesting.
right? Let's look at the resentment journal and ask the questions and find out if this is something we need to drop, delegate, upgrade, or set a boundary around.
That's good. That's
What do we
good.
need to do? Let's
What's
figure
the
it
next
out.
step? What's the next
What's the
step in
next
that?
step? Now that I know that this is going on here, because what happens right now is when you've never set a boundary your whole entire life, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, now I'm done. All of your boundaries are like mini bombs. And the whole world
Mm.
around you is like, what is going on? And you're like, well, people only loved me when I was doing everything for them. Okay, slow down, Sheila. Slow down. You just changed the entire rules of Monopoly on everybody with no
Right.
warning.
That part. Yeah, that's so important.
Like, take a minute. Take a minute and start to understand how we can implement these things in a way that honors our relationships. Because we have this weird belief, especially in the US culture, that we can do everything ourselves, that we can meet all of our own needs, that we're and burnout research is really clear that we need people and we need each other. So when you start throwing out those bombs and electric fences and that everybody's shocked by, you're harming relationships that you
Mhm.
helped create. There's a better way to go through this. We don't have to go full electric fence when it's time
Yeah.
for a boundary. Sometimes somebody needs to hear it. So I'm not saying to hold it all back.
Right, right, right.
Sometimes somebody really just needs to hear it. Sometimes somebody needs out of your life. That is very true. Occasionally, no is a complete sentence. Most of the time, it's not.
Yes. Love
So,
that.
how do we show up not only for ourselves, but for our relationships in a way that honors both of us and the space we create together?
So so let's rewind just a tinge
Yeah.
because whether that's in your personal relationships at home, with your kids, partners, or in the workplace, right?
Mhm.
For our listeners in the workplace, what causes the individual to want to do it for them versus showing them how to do it for themselves so that you don't end up mad that they keep coming back to you to do this work? What causes that?
Well, usually it's just you wanna be a nice person and you don't wanna take the extra time, really. It's just like, "Well, yeah, of course I'll help the new girl out."
Right.
It's just sort of a nice thing. It turns into people pleasing over time. Well, now I don't wanna
Mm,
disappoint them because people pleasing isn't about making other people happy, it's making sure that we are liked. What do I have to do to ensure that you continue to like me? So people pleasing
mm,
is really self-preservation.
that's good.
Usually we learn that in childhood, right? People pleasing, perfectionism, lack of boundaries, codependence, hyper independence, which is also known as super autonomous self sufficiency, which is shortened to SAS, which I think is really funny. But all of
Right.
those,
That is good.
right? So, all of those behaviors we create during childhood to keep ourselves safe. So, the number one rule at Fried for any of my coaches is that we never demonize anybody's coping mechanism.
Right. That's
You're
super
not
important.
right? Like, you're not a bad person because you people please. You're not broken because you have poor boundaries. Whatever, cool. Let's admit where we are and then
Mhm.
figure out how to unwind it and where to use it because it's really useful. It's okay to do those things sometimes. We just have to be really clear on what our intentions are and what we're trying to get out of it. Because when we're not, we're manipulating relationships that then don't even work for us. I'm
Right.
manipulating you into liking me, and then I get mad at you because you don't do enough for me and I'm doing all the things.
Mm,
It's like such a twisted way to go about life. And I say that with full awareness that this is me.
right. You're
I'm
saying
not
it,
talking about
coaching on
you,
it. Right. This is what
right? I'm
we're
not
doing.
talking you out there. I'm talking about me.
Right.
I thought that I was a good person
Hmm.
who was being overly considerate for other people all the time. But really, what I was doing was manipulating all of my relationships so that I was the person that people needed.
Mm,
I was the person that people could count on so that I would be loved.
mm. Oof. Ooh, that's good. All right, so now this is that point in the show, the episode, the interview where it's all about Jamila at this point. Okay, I just want to make sure the audience knows y'all are used to it at this point because that is Jamila to a T, right? Build up this incredible skill set, be able to do a lot of things, a lot of experience and exposure, education across all different areas, and I can do it quickly for you. And there's now you're coming to me for that,
Mhm.
right? And you may fit into this bucket. Someone in the audience may fit into this bucket. To me, and I think this is probably just because it's me as well, it's one of the tougher ones to get past. Of all the things, I feel like it's one of the tougher ones because you're you're serving others. You're
No,
actually
you're
being
not.
a so okay, break that down for me.
No, you're
Break
not.
that down.
You are serving yourself,
Right. That's what I was getting to. Yeah. Yeah.
right? You are serving
Yeah.
yourself. So here's the way through it. Your job every single day is to do something that you assume will disappoint at least one person.
Mm,
Small things. Start with small things. But in order to be able to eventually set boundaries, this is the part that everybody skips. Everybody goes from, oh my God, I'm burnt out. I need boundaries to, oh my God, here's all my rules. That's not boundaries.
right.
Before you can get to the point that you set boundaries, you need to know what within you is shifting and where
Mm-hmm.
those lines truly are. And you can't do that if you think that setting boundaries is going to make you unsafe because we are geared to create
Right.
safety for ourselves.
Have to.
We have to. So it's like this messy thing. But if you practice disappointing people, what you're doing for your brain and for your nervous system is collecting pieces of data that say, I can disappoint people and they'll still love me. And you have
Right.
to do that for years. I just did this recently. dressed to go for a hike, my husband and I and our dog, and we had already dressed, shoes on. That my husband is opening the door, putting the dog in the car. The door is wide open, and all of a sudden I was like, "Ooh, I have to pee." What would I have done for the past
Oh,
17 years
right.
of our relationship?
Previously. Right. Right.
Previously, I would have gotten in the car anyway because I wouldn't have wanted to ask him to wait for 60 seconds. And then I would have gone on a 2.5 hour hike, having to pee the whole time,
Right.
then
Destroying your
being
bladder.
destroying my bladder and being irritable with my husband for taking the long hike, even though I wanted the short hike because I have to pee. I stopped and I was like, "Ooh, it's a moment that I can disappoint somebody." I said, "Hey, I'm
Mm,
actually going to run to the bathroom before we leave." And he went, "Okay."
right. Because we like it was super simple, but we built up this thing in our head. Like you said, maybe it's been 17 years that I can't do this and he's going to be upset or something like that.
Yes. So your job, when you realize that you're in this perfectionist, people-pleasing, lack of boundaries space, is to start collecting data that it's safe to not actually assume what other people want and need from you all the time, and start inserting yourself into the equation. You don't need to be top priority right away because that's a really hard shift to make. Let's just add you into the equation at all. This is what
Right.
my co-pilot Sarah Vosen, she's my co-coach at Fried, my business partner. This is what she says. Just make sure you are in the equation somewhere.
Mm. Got to be X, Y, or on the other side of the equal sign somewhere.
Somewhere. You've just got to be in there somewhere. You don't have to be the only
Yeah.
variable, but you should be at least one of them. And so then went to the bathroom and I went back out to the car and we enjoyed our hike thoroughly because I wasn't
Doing the pee pee dance.
doing the pee pee dance the whole time and then being mad at my husband for something that he didn't. Is he
Had no
supposed to
clue.
know?
Right.
Like he doesn't have like a bladder meter for
Right.
me.
Even in 17 years, he does
Even
not
in
know.
17, he does not have a bladder meter. He doesn't know.
Right. So those are those false assumptions about what others how they may respond, what they may be thinking, whatever that might be in relationship to you or what you might need in that moment or the boundary that you have to
Exactly.
set. That's good. That's good. Now as we wrap up, one question I always like to ask everyone that I interview is to leave the audience with what they believe are 5 words. It could be a sentence, it could be a mantra, statement, whatever that could really, really make the difference in the topic that we're talking about. So I'll put that on your mind as we wrap up. But I also want you to take some time and just share like the one thing that has probably been the biggest impact in your coaching thus far around ending the burnout cycle. What's the one thing that has been the most impactful?
Both of those answers will be really similar, both of those things, because actually resentment has been the most important thing in my own recovery and for guiding my clients. I still call people patients sometimes, old
Yeah, you do.
acupuncture habits.
Yeah.
But resentment has been a revelatory tool
Mm,
for so many people because we're not allowed to be mad. We're not allowed, especially as a Black woman, you're be mad
right.
and then have the
Can't.
stereotype, please,
Can't do
right?
it.
But if I create space for you to just be mad, what a relief. So the space around allowing people their anger
Mm,
and using it to guide them toward what they want and where their boundaries should be and what their needs are has been absolutely revelatory. And the 4 words that I would leave someone with is resentment is your superpower.
mm. Resentment is your superpower. So instead of trying to avoid what society, culture, upbringing, whatever may be the
Church.
case, church has told me is not an okay emotion, then let me go ahead and lean into this and go through it. I've
Mhm.
been referencing Dr. Anita Phillips' book, The Garden Within, as she
Mm.
talks about this from a spiritual place in that Jesus had emotions and it's okay for us too to have emotions. For all my believers out there, it is natural, it is a part of who we were made to be. So to deny ourselves our emotions and feelings would be a huge, huge disservice and contribute to this ongoing cycle of stress and burnout versus just simply saying, this is how I feel, this is what I'm going through. It's okay. And I think your tribe is super important. Your community is
Mhm.
super important in that. And you mentioned having someone just create the space for you.
Yeah.
Sometimes is almost like letting the air out of all of what you might be feeling just to know that someone's there with you and they're like, it's all right. Right? That hug that you might need, that's how that ends up feeling,
Yeah.
is that it's just such a release. I sincerely appreciate you for coming on the 5 Minute Career Hack podcast. I'm going to leave in the show notes how you all can connect with Cait, how you can tap into her podcast and experience her coaching or that resentment journal, which I think is an incredible resource. I'll be sure to leave that in the description in the show notes. And I just truly want to appreciate you. The work that you're doing is far ahead of mainstream. So I believe you are one of the go-to resources for it. And I appreciate you sharing all of this wisdom and all of these gems with our audience. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for taking the time to validate and recognize me. It's really important, and I'm just taking a moment to let it sink in.
As I always end every podcast, having a wonderful day, and I love you. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed doing it for you. However, it doesn't have to end there. Come on over to our Facebook group community right now for free. You're going to get exclusive content that we weren't able to include in this episode as well as past episodes. We've got challenges, we've got research, we've got lives, you name it, all for you in bite-sized chunks so that you can continue this development journey. Go ahead, click the link right now in the description show notes, and we'll see you there.